we'll call the planning and zoning meeting to order of Wednesday, October 16th. Let the record show all commissioners are present. First order of business, we will look at the order of business. Mr. Hadley. The only thing I would have is item 2 seems to possibly have, item 1 seems to possibly have quite a few people here to speak. Would anybody be opposed to moving item 2 up to item 1 and moving item 1 down? Item 2 is going to only take a few minutes probably to go through, so.
It's fine.
Any problems with that? Anyone?
Nope. Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll make that change to the order of business. Is there anything else, Mr. Hadley?
Nope, that'll do it. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Then the first order of business, second order of I guess we'll look for a motion to approve the order of business as amended.
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
And a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 2 would be the meeting minutes from September 18, 2019. Is there any changes or corrections to the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, bottom of page 2, under the FLP 00519 Westridge 3rd Subdivision, looks like I made the motion, but at the very bottom, there's no motion or second stated.
I think Brandy has got that rectified. We just didn't get a new update, so.
Perfect.
Any other changes or corrections that you guys see?
With that, I'd move to approve as presented.
Motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as changed, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, we will move on to our first action item. It's a plat vacation. To consider a plat vacation for the portions of the existing Diamond Acres subdivision within the city of Dickinson, Stark County, North Dakota. The site is generally located on the southwest corner of 10th Avenue East and 21st Street. Mr. Hadley, would you introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item, basically, we've been working with the owner and applicant for quite some time. Engineer Kubis has been involved with this for a number of years. There's no infrastructure, there's no improvements out there. The owner wants to relook at that area, vacate the existing lots and roadways. There is limited infrastructure that's included in that area. They want to keep a few lots, a couple commercial lots along 21st, and then a few residential lots on the west side, predominantly just so they can build out and take advantage of some of the infrastructure that was put in. Then come back in with a formal request to replat or plat that entire area. Obviously, I fielded a number of calls from residents that were just wondering what it was, and just so everybody's clear, now all these vacation requests will come through the Planning Commission as the board that recommended, maybe not yourselves, but as the board that recommended this to the City Commission when this was approved many years ago. You would also be the board to recommend vacating these plats as they come through. And this is part of our ordinance change and process change that we have been implementing. With that, I'm not sure if the applicant or the representative is here. I didn't see them. Staff would definitely recommend approval of the vacation of this just because right now we have no plans or the ability to put the infrastructure in to make those lots buildable.
Okay. Mr. Kitson? Can you,
Hi, how you doing?
state
I'm
your
Dave
name?
Kitson, and I am the owner of the application for the vacate. Jeremy Wood was the guy supposed to be working with. He had other commitments today, so if there's any questions, I can try to answer them. Okay.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant, Mr. Kitson, regarding the vacation?
Nope.
You're just going to look to replat it at some point?
Yes.
Change the
that's-
layout a little bit?
We're just, we had some issues with the water to start with, and it kind of shut the project down for a while, and so we decided to turn around and do something different and relay it out and make it more feasible to use.
Okay. Any other questions, commissioners, for the applicant? Thank you, Mr. Kitson. All right, hearing none, any questions for staff or further comments? not, I guess I'd look for a motion to approve or deny the vacation request.
Is this public discussion?
It is. It's a public-
Okay. Change that, I guess we need to open a public hearing. We will open a public hearing now. If there's anybody in the audience that has any comments or concerns regarding the vacating this plat, please step forward, state your name.
Rick Kleinrechter, I live on 1440 Fifth Avenue East, and I'm not in opposition of it or anything. We live on that 5th Avenue East. And I just want to make sure the traffic stays like the residential like it is if we can. That's kind of what we looked at when we built up there. We looked at the future plan map, and it was housing. So that's the only concern I have, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Kleinwachter. Anyone else have any concerns regarding the vacation of this plat? Please step forward.
Mr. Chairman, just if someone else wants to walk up, but just to clarify that, the zoning is not changing.
The zoning is not, okay.
The
so-
zoning is staying exactly the way it was planned. So
Okay.
when they come through a plat, the zoning will have to match what their plat is. So there is commercial along 21st, as there is now, but the remainder of it at this point is all residential, is all single family, so. And that isn't changing.
All right. One more time, anybody in the audience have any comments or concerns regarding this plat vacation? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, any comments, concerns? If not, now I will look for a motion to either approve or deny the vacation.
Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the plat vacation as presented.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, item 2 on the agenda will be to consider a special use permit for the operation of a group care facility to be located at 959 Chenango Drive in an R1 low-density residential zone within the city of Dickinson, Stark County, North Dakota. Mr. Hadley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item was placed on the agenda for discussion and in hopes of the applicant bringing in a complete application to move this forward for public comment and then for your consideration and the City Commission's consideration at this time. There isn't a formal application, and I believe that we've been instructed that the home has been brought down to 4 people living in the home at this time, and the overall operation has been ceased. I guess I don't have any confirmation of that, but that's what I've heard. Obviously, this use is a necessary use in our community, and you know there's a reason that it's allowed with a special use permit in residential districts. It needs to be in the right place and the right time with the right conditions based on where it's located. Staff, you know, obviously would support this type of use and moving forward in the future. You know, there's obviously this particular location, I believe probably started off on the wrong foot from the standpoint of the neighbors, and, you know, I've been receiving calls and prior to it even being purchased. And so I think that, you know, obviously that's reflected in the audience here. You know, I think we all realize that it's a necessary use in our community, and you know, we support it, but I just think the way this transpired, there's no way that at this point, obviously, staff could support this particular location without having a plan and conditions that might mitigate any circumstances that the community has concerns over. So with that, I believe, you know, I don't know if the applicant is here. I believe Administrator Daw has, you know, a few things that he'd like to add to that. I don't know if Ms. Kripe has anything that she needs to add or wants to add as well, but I think that's all I would have. At this time, I can't support, obviously, this location based on what we have.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. Mr. God, did you have any comments?
I think at this point, maybe the applicant could update us on if they have a plan or not. That might affect what you need to do here today.
Okay, sounds good. Somebody from the applicant would like to step forward and Please give your name. for
Good
the record.
morning.
Good morning.
Members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Megan Frankel, and I am testifying today in support of Hope's Landing Sober Living Homes. I was born and raised in Dickinson. My parents live here, as does one of my sisters along with her family. I have many ties to this community, and I care deeply about the welfare and the future of the city. However, I am appearing before you today in my professional role rather than a personal one. My background is in psychology. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. Currently, I am the administrator of North Dakota's oldest sober living home. I am a trainer for sober living operators across the nation, and I am also the executive director of the National Sober Living Association. The NSLA is standing in support of Hope's Landing and offering our full support in this matter so that their efforts remain in their current location and they continue their valuable work unfettered. The current controversy regarding sober living that Dickinson is experiencing in regards to Hope's Landing is nothing unusual per se. However, it is unique to North Dakota. Currently, North Dakota has sober living homes in Bismarck, Minot, and Jamestown. Like all the sober living homes in North Dakota, they have the ability to house about 10 to 15 residents. The majority of these homes are located in single-family residential zones, and they were not required to obtain a special use license to operate. And all of these communities have welcomed the sober living homes warmly and with great support. In fact, Bismarck was presented with the Humanitarian of the Year award. This morning, my goal is to explain why the Zoning Committee and the City Council should reconsider the direction it is taking in regards to the men's sober living home located on Schnagel Drive. We are all aware addiction and the larger problem of alcoholism exact an enormous toll on individuals, families, communities, and the nation at large. In fact, 1 in 10 people experience the illness of alcoholism and/or addiction. Although advances have been made in people gaining access to treatment, far too few individuals are making it across the bridge from treatment back into the community. Studies show that the vast majority of individuals relapse in the first 90 days following treatment, and by 1 year, a mere 3 to 7% remain sober. It is well known that environment is the #1 factor in maintaining sobriety, so it is easy to identify where the enormous problem occurs and what that gap is which must be filled. There are growing calls to shift acute care models of treatment to models that emphasize sustained post-treatment options in order to elevate long-term recovery rates and enhance the quality of personal, family, and community life. Currently, the most promising, effective, and affordable new mechanism to fill this critical gap is sober living homes. Sober living homes provide a physical and social world for people to recover, and they mark a major milestone in saving lives. Although sober living homes have been operating around the country for about 50 years and many thousands of homes exist, the first sober living home established in North Dakota was only about 5.5 years ago. However, it wasn't long after the Bismarck home opened before other North Dakota communities saw the tremendous results and the positive benefits both socially and financially from that first sober living home and began to duplicate sober living in their communities. Unfortunately, when sober living is new to a community, there's often a great deal of confusion regarding what a sober living home is, as opposed to, say, a treatment facility, a halfway house, shelter, or even sober housing. So it is important to begin with a clarification and definition of exactly what a sober living home is, and more importantly, what it is not. Sober living homes are 100% safe, sober, structured, and supportive living environments. They're only for those individuals identified as alcoholics and/or addicts who are committed to making their recovery their #1 priority. The residents are there by their own personal choice. The residents of sober living operate as members of an extended family. Like any family, they share household chores, agree to family guidelines or rules. They contribute to the financial cost of the home when able to do so, and they support, help, comfort, and guide one another. The major difference between your typical family and a sober living family is that each person commits to 100% abstinence from all alcohol and drug use, and they agree to submit to testing randomly each week to prove that they are keeping this commitment. Sober living is not a treatment, rehab, detox. It does not offer professional services, nor are there any paid employees. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 protects alcoholism if it qualifies as a disability. Both the Rehabilitation Act and the Federal Fair Housing Act clearly included individuals who have a record of drug use or addiction in their definition of disabled under the Act. And because Congress incorporated many terms of the Rehabilitation Act into the FHA, courts have included drug and alcohol addiction in their definition of physical or mental impairment under the FHA. For example, the Ninth Circuit has held that it is well established that individuals recovering from drug or alcohol addiction are handicapped under the Act. The Fair Housing Act defines persons with disabilities as individuals with mental or physical impairments which substantially limit one or more major life activities. The term mental or physical impairment includes conditions such as alcoholism and drug addiction. The term major life activity includes seeing, hearing, walking, breathing, performing manual tasks, caring for oneself, learning, speaking, and holding employment. To qualify for FHA protection, in addition to establishing a disability, a nexus linking the treatment of the disability with the need for housing must be shown. In the context of sober living homes, this nexus exists when living at a particular location, for example, in a single-family neighborhood, is a means of treating the alcohol or drug disability. Specifically, sober living homes actually foster sobriety when they live in an environment established in an upper to middle class neighborhood. Courts have routinely agreed with this theory. Sober living homes allow individuals the opportunity to build essential life skills, financial resources, and support systems, while building a firm foundation in recovery as they transition to living independently and productive lives in their community. Recovery involves three critical components: sobriety, improvement in global health, meaning physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual health, and citizenship, or positive community reintegration. Sober living homes provide mutual support for these three elements of recovery. Someone who is an alcoholic or addicted to drugs will often have to treat the illness for the rest of their life to refrain from returning to their former active addiction and alcoholism. Treatment consists of initial withdrawal period. Then for lifelong sobriety, there must be a program of recovery. Often after detox, people will utilize a traditional treatment program. Once their treatment is completed, the person enters the critical stage of learning how to re-enter society and live independently. Drug use and drinking have become the only normal life they know, and as such, addicts and alcoholics are completely incapable to live life, gain life skills, and often have to relearn everything that for normal people occurs automatically. This is where a recovery community and sober living homes are vital, so that individuals can readjust to normal life before moving out on their own. Sober living homes help individuals adjust to a drug and alcohol-free lifestyle and learn how to function and reconnect to society. Disabled individuals do not deserve to be shut away from society, nor should the only option be for them to exist in an institution or facility. People who have disabilities want the opportunity to be normal members of society. Sober living homes are often the only feasible living options for re-entering and living in the community. These homes work best in middle and upper class, single-family neighborhoods because it needs to be an environment that provides normal social conduct, which will provide a positive normalizing effect. These normal patterns of life and conditions of everyday living need to be as close as possible to the regular circumstances and ways of life in regular society. It is important to experience the facets of everyday life, such as associating with positive neighbors, shopping, obtaining an education, working, Participating in recreation, managing personal affairs and money, mowing and caring for the lawn, cleaning dishes, laundry, preparing meals, volunteering, and community service projects. The community neighborhood has a normalizing and positive self-esteem effect on disabled people, which results in an increase of success for them. It is the neighborhoods that each and every one of us desire that offer the greatest opportunities for social integration and interaction to achieve full potential and become contributing members of society. Isolating or locating individuals with alcoholism and addiction outside of a typical neighborhood is counterproductive due to the very nature of the illness. A single-family residential district is the most appropriate zoning district for sober living homes. For therapeutic reasons, most homes need 10 to 15 residents to be successful in supporting individuals suffering from alcoholism and addiction. A major component of this disease is isolation, anxiety, depression, flawed problem-solving abilities, which is then compounded by limiting a sober living home to 4 to 6 individuals. A successful home constitutes a large family in a single housekeeping unit where residents share responsibilities, meals, rules, recreational activities, as in any family. The intention is that residents, like members of a natural family, will have members to support and guide them, as well as develop deep ties to each other and to the community. Sober living residents learn how to live as a family in a home that fosters the very same family values which our most exclusive residential zoning districts advance. Like their normal neighbors, sober living residents spend weekdays at work or school. After work, their routine parallels that of other families in the neighborhood, relaxing, preparing dinner, doing chores, exercising, etc. The weekends often include attending the church of their choice. The only difference is that on many of the evenings, for an hour or two, the residents will attend 12-step meetings to directly address the spiritual aspect needed for lifelong recovery. Both state and local government regulation must adhere to federal laws and limits, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. People suffering from addiction and alcoholism fall under the protection of the Fair Housing Amendment Act of 1988. When the FHAA added a new section to the act, these amendments made people with disabilities a protected class, which then provided more housing options to such individuals within single-family zoning districts. In May of 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court made it clear that this protection includes residences such as sober living homes. There is no question that the FHAA covers people who are addicted to drugs or alcohol. In fact, this point is so well established that parties routinely stipulate to it. One of the most common methods that cities will attempt to use in order to prohibit sober living homes is by enforcing a restrictive definition of a family. The second tactic is to require a special use permit. Hearings such as has been seen here in Dickinson have often turned into a feeding frenzy of fear and a public lynching of sober living home operators. City officials quite often yield to objections by neighbors, even when shown the law and that sober living homes fall under a special category. A scenario such as this led to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in City of Claiborne versus Claiborne Living Center. In that case, the court ruled that the city had based its decisions on neighbors' unfounded fears and myths about the home and its residents. The Fair Housing Act amendments of 1988 prohibit local governments from discriminating against the disabled by establishing a bedroom per occupant rule, imposing distance requirements between facilities, or prohibiting commercial operators from running sober living facilities in residential neighborhoods. Likewise, requiring a sober living home to obtain a conditional use permit, license, or home occupation permit would impose requirements on the residences of the handicapped persons that are not imposed on other residences. The Department of Justice provides an overview of the Fair Housing Act's requirements in this area. Since the Federal Fair Housing Act was amended by Congress in 1988 to add protections for persons with disabilities, there has been significant litigation concerning the Act's effect on the ability of local governments to exercise control over group living arrangements, particularly for persons with disabilities. The Department of Justice has taken an active part in much of this litigation, often following referral of a matter by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Fair Housing Act prohibits a broad range of practices that discriminate against individuals on the basis of disability. The Act does not preempt local zoning laws. However, the Act applies to municipalities and other local government entities and prohibits them from making zoning or land use decisions or implementing land use policies that exclude or otherwise discriminate against protected persons, including individuals with disabilities. The Fair Housing Act makes it unlawful to refuse to make reasonable accommodations in land use and zoning policies and procedures where such accommodations may be necessary to afford persons or groups of persons with disabilities an equal opportunity to use and enjoy housing. The City of Dickinson's claim that a special use permit and the additional safety requirements as a solution to this situation is misguided. Most sober living homes are established and operated by private individuals or nonprofits, and they do not receive any state or federal funding. Few, if any, sober living home operators can afford to comply with the demands that Dickinson has presented to the local sober living home operators, and as such are not reasonable. Congress added a new section to the Fair Housing Act which declares that discrimination includes a refusal to make reasonable accommodations in rules, policies, practices, or services when such accommodations may be necessary to afford such persons equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. Much of the litigation surrounding the FHAA has revolved around the issue of reasonable accommodation. In fact, the Ninth Circuit recognized that the Fair Housing Act applies to any zoning restriction which may have the effect of discriminating, and it places an affirmative duty on jurisdictions, not the home, to reasonably accommodate the needs of the disabled individual. Courts must ask whether a city's zoning satisfies the FHAA standards or whether the city has to alter policies to reasonably accommodate and integrate the disabled persons regardless of the zone. This does not mean that a city must change its zoning to allow communes, boarding houses, treatment centers, or oil worker fraternities in its most exclusive single-family districts. However, the law does require a city to bend its zoning rules to enable members of a protected class to establish residences in single-family zoning districts. It also prevents a city from creating additional barriers, such as what the City of Dickinson is attempting to do with a special use permit and other requirements. The false concerns regarding the health and safety of sober living home residents is a red herring. These requirements are not imposed upon normal families, regardless of their size, and is simply being used to cover up discrimination against people suffering from the disability of alcoholism and addiction. Requiring the men's sober living home to apply for a special use permit to locate in a single-family district does not constitute a reasonable accommodation that the city is required to make, and the courts have ruled against requiring special use permits or imposing additional safety code requirements. The FHAA is intended to prohibit just such application of special requirements of conditional or special use permits that have the effect of limiting the ability, such as protected individuals, to live together as a family in the neighborhood of their choice. In fact, many have argued that the Act's language was intended to absolutely prohibit any zoning provisions that treat sober living homes even the slightest bit differently than other residential uses. In the City of Edmonds versus Oxford House, the court also recognized that sober living homes need 8 to 12 residents to not only be therapeutically viable, but financially sustainable. Earning power of a newly sober individual is very low, and the majority of the time they simply cannot afford the cost of living when the number is capped below 8. In sober living homes, residents pool their finances via a monthly fee to assist in the running of the home. A sober living home is a long-term living arrangement and akin to the traditional family, which also fluctuates as members enter different phases in life. In Moore v. City of East Cleveland, Justice Stevens specifically referred to the New York Court of Appeals language, which stated that so long as the group home bears the generic character of a family unit as a relatively permanent household and is not a framework for transients or transient living, it conforms to the purpose of the ordinance. No court decision has required a city to give up its capped family zoning. However, they do mandate tipping the cap a bit to enable residences for people with disabilities to locate in single-family zones. This means that a jurisdiction must sufficiently bend its zoning rules and regulations to allow the establishment of sober living homes to accommodate the protected class who live in the community of their choosing, rather than in an institution or other less desirable environment. The majority of court opinions hold that a city can reasonably accommodate sober living homes by simply not enforcing its definition of a family, and that it is the least drastic means to enable sober living homes to locate in the single-family districts in which they belong. No legitimate governmental interest is served by enforcing such a restriction in this case. Indeed, what possible legitimate government interest is served by prohibiting 10 disabled people living in a home in which 10 related people are allowed to live? Any and all regulations must be based on fact in order to be legal. There have not been any facts presented by the City of Dickinson or the neighborhood to justify these actions against the home. The false and overprotective assumptions that sober living home residents need oversight by the city, as well as unfounded fears of problems that residents may pose, simply do not meet the standard of the law. There are some members of the community who view sober living homes as locally unwanted land use. This resistance is spawned by a lack of education, fear, prejudice, and misunderstanding. There is an abundance of research showing that sober living homes generate no adverse impacts. Research to date has found that sober living homes do not negatively affect neighborhoods and even provide benefits to the communities in which they are located. Over 50 studies have examined their impact on property values. All of the studies, despite using different methodologies, have discovered that sober living homes have no effect on property values, even for the homes adjacent to the sober living home itself. Conversely, studies show that sober living are often the best maintained properties on the block. Moreover, these studies have illustrated that sober living homes function so much like a conventional family that most neighbors within 1 to 2 blocks of the home do not even know a sober living home is nearby. A handful of studies have also looked at whether sober living homes compromise neighborhood safety. The most thorough study, conducted for the state of Illinois, concluded that residents are much less likely to commit crime than the average resident. Still, other studies have shown that the homes do not generate undue amounts of traffic, noise, or any other adverse impacts. It would be prudent, legally and financially, for the City of Dickinson to not yield to unfounded fears and myths about the men's sober living home, but to embrace the positive impacts the home has on the community and to value the significant financial savings this sober living home brings to the taxpayers of Dickinson. What the National Sober Living Association urges this committee to do is to recommend to the full Dickinson City Council that the reasonable accommodation in this situation is to recognize the men's sober living home is not a facility, but rather a home for a legally defined class of disabled individuals. As such, no further action needs to be taken, and the city simply needs to recognize the right of these individuals to live as an extended family in the neighborhood of their choice without oversight and have the peace to enjoy the same opportunities as others to realize their full potential in life. Thank you for your time and consideration in this matter.
Thank you, Ms. Frankel. Commissioners, any questions from Ms. Frankel before she steps away? Comments?
If you don't mind, I
Go
do
ahead.
have a question here on the definition of family. You indicated we should not enforce the definition of family. I don't know how we feel about that, or I guess I have some, can you expand on that a little bit? I'm concerned about that because now we have the 10 contractors that live together in a house, or the 8, and we can't enforce that. I mean, that, all of a sudden we have parking for 10 people, 10 cars, 10
Right.
unrelated individuals.
First of all, I want to preface that I'm not an attorney, okay? But the difference between something like 10 contractors and 10 residents in a sober living home, what comes into play is that Americans with Disabilities Act, that they are considered disabled under those amendments, and that for therapeutic and social support, it is recommended that homes have 8 to 12 residents and up so that they can live as an extended members of a family to support each other, share household chores, just like 10 members of a related family would.
You said you manage one of the oldest ones in the state of North Dakota. Can you expand on your experience there and what neighborhood it's in and things like that?
I'm the administrator of the home in Bismarck, North Dakota. Our homes, we have 2 of them. We used to have 3. Are located in single-family residential zoning neighborhoods. So very much like the neighborhood that is here in Dickinson. What tends to happen is that when a home only has 4 to 6 residents within that home, is that it is often harder to run and is less valuable for the residents of that family. So what we see is that when homes have the capacity to house at least 8 to 12 individuals, the outcomes are better for those residents as well as for the operation of the home. In Bismarck, we have not had any problems in these areas. In fact, the neighbors welcome us. We had some misunderstanding in the beginning, but once they saw that, quite frankly, we were the best neighbor on the block, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, doing what we can to be helpful. We address parking concerns, noise concerns, all of that, so that there is not any nuisance problems. And we have been very well received within the community.
Thank you.
One more
Oh, go
question,
ahead.
if you don't mind.
Yep.
You talked about, if there's they're tested weekly possibly for drug and alcohol.
At least.
If there's a failed test, what are the repercussions on that?
They have to be dismissed from the home, according to what the National Sober Living Association does, and Hope's Landing is a member of that association. So in order for the individuals to be considered disabled, they need to be removed from that drug and alcohol use. Therefore, if someone relapses and they are tested at least every 7 days, if not more than that, if they fail, they are dismissed, and they are dismissed immediately. They have no more than 3 hours to pack their things and be off the premises. Right when a positive result is obtained through either a urine analysis or a breathalyzer, if they are on probation or anything like that, that officer is called immediately, as is the emergency contact. But once they have failed a test, they have to be off the property as soon as possible, because then they are no longer falling into that category of a disabled individual seeking help.
Thank you. And just one last question.
You bet.
How often does somebody fail a test? Is there statistics? I mean, do they?
I don't
It's pretty
have
rare.
statistics on that, but it does happen. Unfortunately, individuals sometimes relapse early in recovery. For the most part, what I have seen in Bismarck is that when people drink or use, they don't come home. They don't want to deal with me, right? They don't want to deal with the shame and the embarrassment because it is obviously not hidden from the other residents. In fact, we want the other residents to see that if you drink or use, we do not bend the line on this. You are out and you are out immediately. And oftentimes they would rather not deal with that. They would come back at a later time by appointment only to gather their things.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from Ms. Thompson? Thank
I
you.
had a question
Oh,
on,
1 second, sorry.
you had said you went from 3 homes to 2. What is the reason for that?
The reason for that is that we expanded very quickly. We had one women's home that opened in January of 2014. In July of the same year, another women's home was opened. And then in October of 2016, we opened a home for men. And what happened is with other communities seeing that sober living works and it works well, Minot opened one, Dickinson opened a sober living for women, and there was no longer the need for us to have 2 homes for women in the Bismarck area. It had nothing to do with anything legal or complaints or anything like that.
All right, anyone else? Questions? Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Yep. Anyone else from Hope Landing that would like to step up and make any comments? Please state your name.
Marcia Wiglinda, and I'm a retired addiction counselor that has had a business in Dickinson for 30 years. I guess I understand the reason why people are objecting to this, because people have common views about alcoholism. And I guess what I'd like to say is that I've treated lawyers and doctors and business people in the community, and all of these people have, you know, gotten help. If they've gotten help, they've gotten better. So I think that we need to look at our, it's not a weakness, you know, it's not just depressed people that become alcoholics or drug addicts. It's anyone. And we have a choice here in the community. We can either help these people stay sober, or we can let them back into the community and have them drink and cause all kinds of financial burden on the city. Here we're trying to work with them and trying to keep them sober, and they can be productive. They're not costing the community any money. They're not costing them anything to be sober. But if they're not sober, they're costing the community a lot. So I think Megan did a great job in explaining the whole process, and I hope that we can support this kind of facility because it is very needed. And I appreciate your time and giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Anyone else from Hope's Landing that would like to make a comment?
Hi, my name is Jeff Bice, and I'm going to come to you as a recovering addict alcoholic. I'm also the director of Men's Sobriety House in Dickinson. My story, I'm going to tell you a quick story of where my life was. I started drugs and alcohol at a very early age. Alcohol when I was probably 8, 9 years old, and I was already went into an alcoholic coma by the time I was a junior in high school. I tried to sober up from then on till 2008. In and out of treatments, and just struggled until I had the opportunity to go to a house, somewhat similar to Hope's Landing, but not Hope's Landing because that wasn't available. Where I had that safe place to go, where I wasn't put right back into the community and the surroundings that I was in before. For 30 years, I struggled to sober up, and when I was able to go to that safe place and have those people and have that support around me, which is the reason I got involved with Hope's Landing Men's Sobriety House, is because I seen that it was similar to how I sobered up over 11 years ago. The only way I'm standing here today alive and no questions asked is because I had that opportunity to be at that place and to have those people, that support. The people, AA helped me, but I couldn't do it with just AA when I first got out. When I first tried to sober up, I was too far into it to be to be on my own. I mean, I couldn't do it. But when I had that surroundings and that safe place to go to, I made it. And I stayed there at that safe place for a number of months with plenty of support, and then plus meetings. And I haven't turned back to either drugs or alcohol for over 11 years. I have a successful business now where I couldn't even function when I sobered up. I was dangerous to myself and other people back then. I don't want to get into a whole bunch of, this isn't an AA meeting, this isn't a share deal, but I'm telling you, Hope's Landing for Women's is when I know where I first just heard about it in Dickinson. I have seen the results with the women that have been through this program that they've had in Dickinson for a couple of years now. And when I heard they started a men's group, Hope's Landing for Men Up, I grabbed onto that opportunity right now because I know the importance. I live the importance already of these homes. Without this support for a lot of individuals, you're going to have the jail, you're going to have the DUIs, you're going to have the thefts, you're going to have all these things that an addict, alcoholic does. You're going to have abusive family relations, you're going to have police issues and everything else because they cannot get out of that lifestyle. But with this opportunity to live and with the support that these people have, you're going to have people like me coming out of them where they're productive, where they are paying taxes instead of having taxpayers' money taking care of them. There's just so many advantages to having Hope's Landing. We do strictly enforce the rules. I am the director at Hope's Landing Men's Sobriety House in Dickinson. There has never been a case since this is open that anyone has brought drugs in or used drugs in that place. When someone has to be removed, it's when they're somewhere else at a job or whatever they do, and then they come back in. We immediately test, and if there's a question, we have random tests. We have everyday alcohol tests, weekly urinalysis, and if there's a question, we have more than one test. We'll put random tests in because if we suspect, and I am immediately called, as soon as somebody doesn't pass that UA test or that alcohol test, and I immediately remove them from the premises. There has never been active use in this house, and there will never be active use in this house. We even have strict guidelines of what they can have as far as medications when it comes to if someone can abuse that medication, it cannot be in this house. There is nothing but a positive on this house. It's a life-saving opportunity for the people who can be there. And to me, if we don't have it, we are actually signing certain people's death warrants. I mean, that's the seriousness of the disease of alcohol and drug addiction and the outcomes. And the outcome of somebody who can get out of that is, I'm going to use myself as an example, to do major construction jobs and everything else, and before not even be able to figure enough out to even take care of myself. So I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bice. Any questions for Mr. Bice before he steps on? Thank you, Mr. Bice.
Hi.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alexandria Bird. I am the director of the Women's Home, Hope's Landing Women's Home in Dickinson, and I just wanted to come up and speak a little bit on that. That home has been there for about 3 years. If you look, the only times the cops have been called is I had to call the cops when a woman used. Immediately, they came, she was removed. We have regular drug dogs coming through the house on a regular basis. We work closely with the police department and parole and probation, so just to ensure that we are living in a safe environment, that all the women are living in a safe environment. We don't have noise complaints. Just like Megan talked about, our homes are taken care of just like a family unit, mowing the grass, shoveling, taking care of our yard. We don't loiter out in the front. It's not what the perception, I guess, is sometimes perceived. I have seen women make it, do incredibly well, who have their lives back, their children have hope because of that home, because of that family. When you're in the life of drugs and alcohol, a lot of times you're either, distant from your family by your own choice, or they stop talking to you. And when you come into this home with, like you said, 8 to 12 people together, you become a family unit. They cook together, they pray together, they just love on each other to help support each other to have a life outside of those drugs and those alcohol. It's been such a benefit to our community and to the women, and I just really believe that the men need that same opportunity. They deserve it too. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Brewer?
She forgot to mention that they do get jobs.
Yes, they do, right away. In the community, making money, paying taxes.
For you and for Mr. Bice, as director, what exactly does that entail? Are you on site? Is it regular hours?
No, I'm not on site all the time. It's not like a set time, but I'm there a lot. Checking in, making sure things are going well. Like you said, doing UAs, breathalyzers, just making sure the running of the house is going smooth. But mainly what we want is for them to be self-supporting, work through things themselves, and I get involved when, that doesn't work out as well. Oh, and we have house managers too. So I have 2 ladies in the house right now who have been there for a while, who have exhibited leadership and strong recovery and just really on fire for their recovery. And then they were promoted to our house managers, is what we call them. So they're in recovery, just like everyone else in the house. But they're there just to kind of keep a balance of making sure things are running well when because I'm not there all the time. We're not employees. We're not stuff like that. So.
Okay, I guess that was my question. You're
Okay.
not an employee of the house.
No, I'm not.
Thank
Nope.
you.
There's also weekly house meetings where us as directors are weekly at the house, and it's at a set time, and we go over the issues, and if somebody has to be removed or there's an issue in the house that doesn't require removal but requires going back a phase, because we have 3 phases we go through as far as where they're at in recovery, then we will deal with that and put the repercussions on such as it needs to be. This is not to punish these people. This is to get these people to where they can make it on in society. And we've had family members fathers start paying child support since they've been there, and they've never paid child support for it. And this is Hope Landing for Men in Dickinson is a very short period. In one individual alone has started paying child support, is carrying on a job. Matter of fact, I employed one of them. The director is the person who oversees the whole house and when something needs to be dealt with, it's dealt with. They also the house managers contact us as directors when there's an issue with any individual, or the people at the house contact us if they are having a problem with the house managers. And we're kind of the overseer when you start with drug and alcohol addiction, your emotional maturity stops. When I quit, I was probably emotionally 13 years old trying to live in an adult world. And it's pretty darn tough to deal with in an adult world at 12, 13 years old. So I'm kind of a babysitter in a way to start out. I mean, that's kind of the house director's job. Get them, and then when they start maturing and getting to a certain point, they get more responsibilities and things go as that goes. They have a chance to grow up in this house.
Thank you, Mr. Bice. Okay, anyone else from Hope's Landing that would like to make any comments?
I just briefly want to mention one
Yes.
thing. Sorry for taking
Yep,
up
you're-
so much time. Mr. Karski, you asked about relapse. There have been homes in America that have been operating for over 50 years, right? The NSLA presents best practices and somewhat an outline or a model of how a house should be run to get the best results. When individuals, residents, come to sober living and they stay for 9 months to a year, they have a 75% chance of not relapsing again within a 10-year period. After that, they stop tracking. In Bismarck, we use these best practices, as does Hope's Landing, and many of their members have been trained by the NSLA. And what we see in Bismarck is that we actually overshoot that 75% mark, and it bumps up to 83% of individuals who stay for 9 months to a year remain sober today. Now, granted, we've only been in operation for about 5.5 years, and we've only been tracking this for about 4. But those odds are very high. When someone walks out of a treatment facility, they have about a 3 to 10% chance of staying sober for a year. And the difference is that in sober living, you are a part of the community, right? You're required to get a job. You're required to go out and be of service. You're required to attend recovery meetings and get some roots within the recovery so that by the time these individuals walk out of that home, the only thing that should be changing in their lives is where they put their pillow at night. So just wanted to give you that information.
Thank you again, Mr. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Kubis.
A question for Ms. Frankel, if she wouldn't mind. Might be important to this discussion or future discussions. Twice in your presentation, which was very well prepared, thank you, you had mentioned that these types of facilities, these homes, should be located in upper to middle class neighborhoods. Could you expound on that or explain why that's an important value to the home?
Yes, so oftentimes, unfortunately, what we see is that everyone wants to help, but oftentimes it feels as though it should be in an industrial area of time or town, I'm sorry, or over there. But when individuals are in a single family residential zone, what that entails is that they are in the most normalized position of society, right? If you put them down, not them, addicts or alcoholics in industrial zone, that is often the area we're trying to get those individuals out of. We're trying to remove them from living these lives that are chaotic and not normalizing as a life in a single family neighborhood is. And there have been many studies that show when in sober living homes are located within that zone, that stabilizing effect of a community neighborhood helps promote that individual to learn essential life skills and to navigate society and be a part of that community. Does that answer your question?
When we first began with the Women's House, we looked at various homes that were available. And one of the first homes I was shown was a house that was very, very old, very not well kept, and I think it confirmed the perception that these people should only be in a should be in a substandard place because frankly they were substandard. That is not what sober living houses are to be. We want them to take a step up. We want them to practice being good citizens. We want them to think well of themselves. I belong in a good house because I have left this life. This is not where I want it to be. If we leave them in the many trap houses, flop houses that there are even in Dickinson, they cannot recover, and the cycle will go on and on and on and on.
Could you just state your name for the record, please?
I'm sorry, I'm Kayleen Wardner. I am the coordinator of Hope's Landing.
Thank you. Any questions from Mrs. Wardner?
I have one question for Ms. Frankel.
Ms. Frank, okay.
You went through a lot of the legal requirements in your presentation that are put on cities. I guess my question is, in your opinion or in your research, are you feeling like there is any restriction a city can put on a group home or a sober living home?
Again, I'm not an attorney, but basically the main problems we see, right, that the city can address are things like parking, basically your nuisance abatement laws, I believe is what it's called, parking, noise, a home not being maintained properly, just like you would impose upon me if I were not upkeeping my home with my family. Again, there is the definition of a family, which the city does choose, but again, under the ADA and those amendments to that Federal Fair Housing Act, alcoholics and addicts do qualify as disabled, and it has been proven that the more individuals that can live together for that therapeutic and social support, the better it is.
How do you propose that cities and sober living houses work together if outside of a process like this?
What I would propose, right, is that the owner-operator, that all of you have her contact information, that all of the neighbors have her contact information. I know that if there is ever an issue in Bismarck, our neighbors have my cell phone number. And if there is something going on, and the only thing I can think of is one time there were some cigarette butts in the alley, right? So I had the residents go and clean that up immediately, but I am on call for those neighbors. I am there to address any of their concerns. And if there's any issues, it is addressed immediately for our residents so that we can continue to be the best neighbor on the block. And what I would suggest is that all of you have that contact information as well so that you can work very closely together on this matter and become allies, right, instead of counterproductive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frankel.
Ms. Frankel, I have a question for you.
Oh. Mr. Decker, sorry.
We recently had a facility repurposed within the city, our old hospital. Why would a facility like that not be something that would be looked at for your sober living facility?
Well, first of all, a sober living facility operates best in a home. As I mentioned, I believe, several times, right? We want to operate as an extended family. One of the biggest components of alcoholism and addiction is isolation and separation. People do not have their own rooms, right? They share rooms, they share common areas within the home. We want them bumping into each other a lot so that they have that support from one another. So if you were to take a huge facility such as a hospital and stick a bunch of people into their own rooms where they don't have that shared living space, such as a kitchen, dining room area, living areas, entertainment areas, then that isolation can occur. And that is something that we do not want within sober living. Like I said earlier, we operate as a big extended family.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question.
Yep.
Your model right now states that you have to have 10 to for this to be fiscally viable. Now, even with daycares, we have fire restrictions within a daycare because there's an excessive, or there's more than the normal amount of people within a home.
Mm-hmm.
To Ms. Kripe's question, can the city not require sufficient fire suppression within a facility that has 10 or more people?
If myself and 10 of my relatives were living together, would the city come in and tell me I had to get sprinkler systems?
I would say no, according
And
to it. But
so-
and
I'm not trying to be facetious or anything like that, but the point I'm trying to make is that it operates as a family, right? A single family residence, a dwelling.
But what I'm stating is for safety purposes, for the safety of those individuals within that facility.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be reasonable of us to request that there is proper, because there is above the normal amount of individuals living in this facility?
And I completely understand what you're going for, and in that is that unfortunately, though, that would put a small operation like this out of business because of the fiscal costs that would incur upon them. The NSLA, we come in and we do inspections to make sure that they are following our requirements when it comes to carbon monoxide, fire concerns, also crowding. We have limits upon how many people can be in each bedroom per square footage, cleanliness, food storage, all of that. So there is some oversight in that regard.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from Ms. Frankel? Mrs. Wardner?
Thank you. And as for fire concerns, we do have a contract with Total Safety out here that they check our facility once a year. They check our fire extinguishers. We have fire ladders. We promise safe, sober, and accountable, and that certainly includes fire prevention.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you,
Gordon.
Ms. Warner. Good
Hi,
morning.
I'm Sandy Bertelson, and on a positive note, Haley, I'd like to address your question about how the city and the landing can work together. I retired just a few years back, and I find myself in a position where I was asked to be on the executive board for Hope's Landing for Women. Didn't really know what I was getting into when I got started, but the time that I've spent there, I've certainly seen the positive things that have come out of Hope's Landing for Women. And one of the things, I never was real big in out working with the public until I got on this board. And we just recently had a fundraiser. It's called a St. Patty's Day fundraiser. And I had the opportunity to see how generous and giving this community is. We collected different donations from our community members, our businesses, and the people in the community. We had many of our community members buy tables to come to the dinner, because at that event there is a real focus on education about what alcoholism and drug addiction does to people, where they go, and how they can recover. And I think one of the biggest things is education, knowing about what really does go on. We develop pamphlets and flyers and information, and we've been trying to go out to community groups and share about what happens with this home and what happens till they get there. But I think I just truly have to say, I really appreciate what I saw as the giving that came from this community. I've never seen that before. I've never been a part of a big fundraiser for a community event. This was my first experience. And when I stood in that group, a huge group of people that came, and I looked at all the things that had been donated by this community and the community support we had at that event, I just couldn't believe it. I just stood there and stared. So I do have to say, the community does a lot for us, and we hope that continues to be that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burleson. Anyone else from Hope's Landing that would like to speak, please step forward. Okay, seeing none? Yes.
Jason, I have a question for either for
Mr. Bush.
Mrs. Byrd or Mrs. Wardner, either one. So we have a Hope's Landing for women in Dickinson, and how many residents does that have?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
We have a Hope's Landing for women, I understand. Okay, and how many residents does that have?
It can hold up to 10.
Okay. And
Comfortably.
that's in a residential neighborhood?
Are we in a? No, I know.
No.
You know, we have apartment buildings near us and the nursing homes.
Okay, so it's zoned differently.
Right.
It's not single-family designation where they're located?
No, it's not.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Hall.
I just want to point out, we are kind of running short on time. Mr. Kubus and I are going to have to leave for another meeting pretty soon, but I wanted to make some comments. I wanted to let Hope's Landing speak first, because I think we wanted some clarity. We as a city, like Mr. Hadley had said, we're under the impression they weren't moving forward with this, and we're finding that's not the case today. And I just want to point out a little bit of what we're really talking about. And to Mr. Bush's question, we do have a sober living house here, and it's fairly confidential. I'm not going to tell you where it's located. It is located in a more of a multifamily zoned neighborhood, right on the excuse me, right on the edge of a residential neighborhood. It happens to be the residential neighborhood I reside in, just not too far away. You don't know it's there until you drive by it, and you don't know it's not that when you drive by it. A little bit different, it was not constructed as a single-family home. It was constructed as more of a group living facility, and we think, in my understanding, meets some of the fire codes of a larger occupancy. So really what we're talking about here is, do we allow them in a single-family neighborhood? And as we've heard, it doesn't preempt the zoning code. So we need to clarify that what the zoning code says is that no more than 4 unrelated people. So when you get 5, that's where it comes in. This is also a permitted use with a special use permit process, which usually gives a little bit of hearing, kind of a public hearing like this, because when we allow something that may be allowable with some consideration, or something that's not allowed, but maybe we give an exemption. I think you heard earlier a resident to the property that's being vacated. Well, I'm a little concerned because I just want to make sure that it's used the way I thought it was when I bought my home. And so that's really what this is about. It's not about the fact that it's a sober living house. And I think maybe that has taken a little bit different approach. You know, the city has these rules. I was told a month ago I wasn't listening and I'd made up my mind. I'll tell you, this morning I was thinking about it. I haven't made up my mind if I would want to live right next door to one of these or not. But if we put it in context of why this popped up, initially I think in the city of Dickinson, was we had large groups of men or women living together, working together, that weren't in a sober environment. And I think we've referred to them as man camps. So I thought to myself, would I rather live next to a sober living facility of 5 to 10 men, or would I like to live next to a fraternity house or a sorority house or a rental house of 5 to 10 men? And maybe the 30-year-old Joe Gaw would have said that sounded more fun, but the 45-year-old Joe Gaw says, I like the people that go to bed at 10. So that's might be where I want to live. And I think that's what's happened in this discussion, is perhaps and I think we've gotten really good clarity today, but that was the problem. We didn't have clarity. This happened in a single-family neighborhood. It caused an emergency scare. We didn't have the ability to prepare. You've heard the word reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation means that we look at the situation, we look at the house, we look at the usage, and we come up with some things that aren't 4. It might not be 100, but it's not 4. And I had a discussion the other day that perhaps, and the way this has been handled in some other communities, is you look at the number of bedrooms, how many people are in a bedroom, let's say 2. So if it's 4-bedroom house, that's 8. And Fire Marshal Selly's here, in sake of time, maybe he doesn't have much to say, but the fire department did a lot of work looking at other communities in North Dakota, particularly the Bismarck facilities, the Minot facilities. They didn't all open following a lot of process up front, but behind it there was a lot of research done and work. Both fire chiefs in both of those communities, particularly the Bismarck model, we've heard a lot today, did a lot of work after they opened, and the way these are being done, they're very comfortable with. When we talk about the sprinklers, which becomes an occupancy of 6, they're okay with that, much because it is a single-family home. We know in a single-family home, you can't use the basement rooms as bedrooms unless they have egress windows. So the same rules can apply. We've talked about these folks get up in the morning, they go to work, they come home, they do things around the house, and they go to bed. That's a normal family activity. So as long as they're not exceeding the occupancy as far as bedrooms and 2 per person, that would probably be what I would recommend as a reasonable accommodation. I do think, and you're probably going to hear it fairly soon, that the residents do get an opportunity, because it is in a zone that's not what it's zoned for, to voice their concerns. I think you'll hear that they are sympathetic to the usage, maybe more so today, but that's the balance that you as the commission have, is what is your recommendation moving forward. I think if you use a per bedroom standard of likely 2, and I think maybe to ask them what they think, what they're using, how many people are in a bedroom, I think that's appropriate, and that would be the staff's recommendation is, if there can be a balance struck with the neighborhood, any neighborhood, how would we go about this? It would be the per bedroom standard.
Thank you, Mr. Gah.
Can I add to that? It would have to be by the size of the bedroom too, because some of the homes we have in Dickinson, which would probably fit, they have very large bedrooms, where some of the homes have very small bedrooms. So sometimes it's not feasible to have 2 in a small bedroom, where in a large bedroom you could probably have 4.
Sure. Yeah.
Kind of like they do for daycares, they go by square foot.
A discussion I had the other day was, well, what if we were back at square one? There was no such thing as any sort of group living house of any sort in Dickinson. What would we do? If an entity came into City Hall and said, hey, I've been running around with my realtor, Shirley Dukart, and she's shown me a house that I just love, that we want to put this facility in, what would we do? Well, what I think we would do is send the building official and the fire marshal out with this person that's interested to look at the specific home and say, yeah, based on square footage, we think this. Based on bedrooms, we think this. And come up with that reasonable accommodation and that plan from the very beginning. I think that would be the best case approach. Now, 20/20's hindsight, but I think you're right. Every house is different. I don't think my house, a couple of my bedrooms, I wouldn't want to put 2 people in. So I think you're right, Ms. Dukart, that looking at the specific facility from the beginning and looking at fire code issues, building code issues, occupancy loads, all of that's appropriate and part of a reasonable accommodation process.
And there's another factor here too. Megan, most of these homes are privately bought, right? By private individuals. They're not group funded, they're not federally funded.
Yes. Most homes receive no state or federal funding. What tends to happen is either private individuals or a nonprofit will go to purchase these homes and pay either mortgages or leases or whatever the case may be.
So then they have to go by price shopping too.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I think we've heard from Hope's Landing. Anybody else from Hope's Landing that has a comment? If not, we will open it up to anyone else that has comments regarding this application. Please step forward and state your name.
My name is Ben Roberts. I live just 2 houses down. Those are 3 of my 5 kids. That's the reason for my concern. Yeah, my concern as a father is not with the success rate, it's with the 5 or 10 failure rate, just as a father. So I just ask that you put that in consideration. I know the Ninth Circuit was mentioned a few times, the most liberal court in the land. I don't think that counts for much. So I just ask you that if it needs to go to court, that you'd go to court, and if it loses, it loses. So that's my request.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Any questions for Mr. Roberts before he sits down? Thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
Jess Morton. You know, these little guys right here, they don't get to play outside anymore because of that house. I don't let my girls outside still. Absolutely not. Without me, they can't even take out the garbage unless I'm outside because I do not trust that situation. And yeah, the whole conversation got off point earlier. We were supposed to be talking about the location and we were supposed to be talking about the permits. They did renovations on that house. Did they have permits? Because I guarantee if I was the one doing anything at my house and I didn't have a permit, guess who would be in trouble? So here's one question that I really want you guys to ask is why didn't she buy the house that's directly across the street from her? It is empty and it has been empty this whole time. She could have had this problem in her neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morton. Any questions for Ms. Morton before she steps away? All right. Yep.
Also, there's 10 men standing here or sitting here. Imagine all of you in one house, in very small rooms, sold by Shirley Dukart.
Thank you, Ms. Morton. Good morning.
Morning. My name is Travis Brazelton. I was asked by the neighborhood to stop by. He's going to be surprised that I'm a liberal. But Prescott, Arizona has got about twice the size of Dickinson. And in the last 10 years, they went from 15 to 169 of these sober housing units. They are weeds. Once you let them in, they just keep coming. They keep kind of hinting at lawsuits and stuff like that. Just last year, Casa Mesa, California, they had a jury and they shut them down because just like Square One, they're trying to mix family unit and our ordinance of unrelated people. They are trying to put more than 4 unrelated people in a house. And their threats of suing and stuff doesn't apply to that. They're trying to call their group a family and as one unit. And that's just not the way it is. So it's just a scare tactic. My question is the same as the neighborhood, is why isn't it in their neighborhood, in Wardner's neighborhood? Because we wouldn't tolerate it for 5 seconds. Right in between the 2 high schools, you're going to put a 10-man facility? It would never happen. It would have been tossed out a long time ago. I work in the oil field. My guys get randoms. My guys are all tested before they come to work. I can't stick 10 of those guys in a house in Dickinson and put them to work. And my guys, they go to work every day. I know what they're doing. I'm based out of Williston. I could easily have all my guys, none of them are from Williston, all living in a townhome or someplace, but it's not acceptable. I couldn't imagine having, just purchasing my house and finding out one day that, 10 people are going to be living next door to you, a 10-man facility. I have got one of the churches who does the NAAA, they feed the homeless and stuff like that, and they are in constant communication with all of us at all times, telling us what's going on so we can make arrangements. So my daughter's not outside goofing off in the alley right next to the facility, because it's just a bad idea. And for them to, my safety cockles all got raised up when they were like, well, you wouldn't ask your home of 10 relatives to have special sprinklers or anything like that. Well, it should, absolutely should. Just proves to me that safety isn't their number one priority. Their people are not there constantly. They've got employees that come in and out. They meet once a week. That's not good enough. None of this is good enough. And if it's not good enough for right next door to them, it's not good enough to push onto some other neighborhood. The location is the problem, and how it was handled was the problem. We need this facility, absolutely. These people need all the help that they can get. But next door to a family with 5 kids or whoever else, that's just not acceptable. There needs to be other arrangements made. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brazel. Any questions for Mr. Brazelton before he steps away? Okay. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Denise Ney.
What was the last name again?
Ney, N-A-Y. I have 50 signatures here from neighbors that have come to our meetings who feel the same way that we do. They feel that we got blindsided. Not once were we even informed about the sober living house. Mrs. Wardner opened it, moved in, dropped letters off at several houses, and said, we're here. I'm responsible for my clients, and I guess as we as a neighborhood felt, well, is that right? We pay taxes, we have jobs, we lived in the neighborhood for a long time. It's a very nice neighborhood. We have lots of kids, teens, and they were always outside. Not anymore. We just feel that Mrs. Wardner could have went a long way by coming to us and saying, this is my plan. I don't think she came to the city and said, offered you a plan either. In fact, I know that. I called Mr. Hadley in June, and he knew nothing about it. So, and if you like it was stated before, how would you feel if you had 10 men living in a house beside you with no constant supervision, and the easements between those houses is so narrow that if there's smoking outside, if there's noise, it's going to be heard even more than most normal houses because of the easements being so close together. So I would like you to consider all of our concerns, because they are concerns. And we would like to have our neighborhood back the way it was. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ney. Any questions for Ms. Ney
Do you
before
need
she
these?
steps away? Yeah, you can give them to Brandy, please. Any questions for Ms. Ney? Okay. Anyone else that would like to make comments?
I do have a question for
Oh,
Ms. Ney.
all right, Mr. Karski. Ms. Ney, could you?
Ms. Ney, you said 50 signatures. In your gathering those signatures, did anybody cite any specific instances of any issues with the people that live there? Was there, I mean...
There was. I can tell you what they are. One was, we first had a first meeting after Mrs. Wardner brought the letters to 4 or 5 houses on the block to inform us that Hope's Landing was opening. And at that meeting, we had 39 people there. And at that point, we had, one lady has a daycare in our neighborhood. She's had it for 20 years. And her daycare people were concerned with having the sober living facility on our block, and were going to start pulling their kids if it didn't leave the block. We've had...
But that's not a specific issue with any member of the household?
No,
Okay.
it's not specific, but that does affect someone's income on our block, and why should they have to put up with that? They didn't ask for it. I have no problem with the ministry that Mrs. Wardner is doing. Yes, those people deserve a second chance. It was how it was done and where it was done. I mean, that's the whole point of it. If I want to sell my house is one of my biggest assets I have. If I want to sell that house, my realtor is going to have to inform the potential buyer that we have a sober living facility on our block. Did Mrs. Wardner inform us that she was coming into our block? No. I've called realtors. I mean, I'm saying we got blindsided. You know, why should I have to have my value of my property go down because of a sober living house that we weren't informed of?
I believe it was indicated that there's 50 case studies on property values that,
We've called realtors, not only in Dickinson, but other towns, and they all tell you the same thing. Yes, your property value is going to go down.
Can I make a comment, please?
Mrs.
That is not
Stupert.
true. They're a protected class. We cannot tell anyone.
I find that hard to believe.
We can't. On protected classes, for me, that would be discrimination, and I would lose my job.
I have been told that they have to do it within 1 to 2 blocks of the sober living facility. It does need to be, the buyer needs to be made aware. So.
I would like to know who that realtor is.
I don't think I have to tell you who that
No, I know you
realtor
don't,
was.
but
Okay.
So,
All right, thanks, Mrs. Nay. Anyone else? Please step forward, state your name.
My name is Lee Magstead, and my wife and I, we live right absolutely next door to the sober living facility that was operating, and we have a couple concerns. Obviously, the property value, which we've talked about, the easement, which we've talked about. Obviously, the zoning is an issue, but parking is another issue. If we get 10, at one time, I'm not exactly positive, I'm not going to speculate, but I believe there was 4 or 5 gentlemen living at the resident next door to us, which we are probably from here to this young lady on the computer from their property line. I believe it's 9 feet. Smoking is an issue. We went from the upstairs to the basement because the gentlemen were smoking. I understand that's all part of the game, but the issue I have is if you have 10 men in a house, our house is basically the same size as that house. It's a 4-bedroom house. Mrs. Wardner and Mr. Wardner gave us a tour of the house before they opened it. My personal opinion, to have 10 grown men in a house that size is going to be pretty crowded. And another concern I have is, I believe Ms. Frankel said that these gentlemen guarantee they're buying into this, we're going to get sober, and I'm 100% for that. But there's no guarantee that these gentlemen are going to go the other direction. I've dealt with alcohol in our family, and at times they can get pretty rough when things get rough on them. So, and I'm all for this type of facility, but I just have a hard time believing that we want to have a facility in the middle of our houses. I know the neighbor to the south is just as close as we are. So we're talking, that house is here, and that wall is us, and that wall is the neighbors to the south. And another thing, if you get 10 gentlemen there that are going to be driving vehicles, it's going to be an awful crowded parking lot, because there's probably parking for 6 or 7 vehicles in that area. They have a double driveway. Like I say, we've lived there our whole lives, and we are definitely for rehabilitation, but we don't feel that it should be in our neighborhood in a residential section. And I do agree with Mrs. Nay. We used to see a lot of kids running around. I know there's a fear amongst the neighborhood. And one other thing I'd like to say is the question for Mrs. Wardner and Ms. Frankel. Are these gentlemen, do they have criminal records? I mean, when they come, the majority, how many have a criminal record? Okay, so.
Could you step up to the mic, please?
Yep. If I can just add, we do not take violent offenders, we do not take sex offenders. There is a public registry of sex offenders, and everyone is checked versus that registry to make sure that those crimes have not been committed. In addition, there is an application process and an interview, so it's not as though someone calls and it's like, yeah, come on in. but they're actually vetted and spoken with prior to make sure that they're committed to doing what they need to do to get and stay sober.
Can I add to that too?
Yes.
We work really strongly with parole and probation. We have a parole person on our board. She had meant to be here this morning. You often, the whole group has talked about 10. We've only asked for 8. When you talked about 2 people a bedroom, our request to the city was for 8 people, not for 10. I'm sorry, and I just want to say about the cars, most of our people do not have cars. I think the most cars we've had, Lee, are 2 people with cars. Rich and I may have been there, and Jeff could have been there, but most of our
But
people
my
don't
point
have
is, if you would get 8 gentlemen that are driving, 8's going to be a crowded
Oh,
neighborhood.
do you know what, when Megan talked about we want to be good neighbors, we had already made plans we would never allow more than 4. In fact, 3 I think would be the maximum, and we would look for other places to park. We want to be good neighbors, whether we're here or some other place. We would hardly put that many cars in front of, I wouldn't want them in front of my house. And by the way, why did we choose this house? Number 1, the house across the street from ours, we looked at a lot of different houses. This is the only one that we could have. And also, it was not close to a place where drugs are being sold, which took a lot of neighborhoods out of running.
Thank you.
And one other article I'd like to bring up is, I know in the paper, when I read the article that Mrs. Warder had written about anonymity, I think the cat's out of the bag right now. I think everybody in this town knows where this place is at. Couple other things, like I say, I see it firsthand. I'm 50 feet from it. Are these gentlemen all from North Dakota? Where do they come from? Did they bring them in from out of state? How does it work? I guess, can you explain that to me? Like the other day, I saw a van with Nebraska plates on, and 3 or 4 gentlemen got out of it. A white, big, long, white van.
At our place?
Yes.
And they went in our
Guys were communicating with the gentleman in there. So that's why I'm wondering, are we gonna get guys coming in here from Florida, from California, from Minnesota? I don't know. I guess that's a question I have too.
I'm baffled. I have no idea.
Because we've seen this white van. I don't know who it is, what it is, but it's been there a few times. And one of them had Nebraska plates on.
You know what, the letter I sent you guys, call me. I have no idea I have no idea who this is. Right now, we have only 2 residents because we quit taking them. And so, I'm just going through my mind. One works at a place that I wouldn't, I have no idea, but I will still check. Call me. One of ours is from Dickinson, was born and raised here. The other one has been here many, many years, but not looking for
Okay. Anyway, I've covered all the bases. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate
Magstad.
it.
Any questions for Mr. Magstad before he steps away, Commissioners? Thank you again.
Yeah.
Ms. Morton?
See this? If I'll come closer. But it's pictures proving exactly what he said. Multiple vehicles at various times of the day and night. This is not a joke. This happens all the time. Always at the night time. So, I mean, I got a bunch. If you want them.
Yeah, you can.
Oh, the part where you're there only every other week?
That's cool.
You're not.
Let's see them.
I just wanted to add, they pointed it out, caller. These people aren't their employees. It's not their job to take care of that property for them. When there should be somebody there all the time taking care of this stuff. You know, That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Brazelton. Anyone else in the public that would like to make comment, please step forward.
I'll be brief. My name is Sean Smith. I live in the affected area. I've done a lot of reading, as I'm sure most of the city staff has done, about these kinds of facilities and homes. Everyone can make their own opinions. There obviously has been a lot of individuals sharing their opinions through the vast forms of social media. This has happened once before in Dickinson in 2010, where a gentleman who was licensed by the state of North Dakota attempted to apply for a permit. The address was near the new middle school on 26th Street. He was providing 24-hour staff and supervision. There was also a daycare close. The permit was denied because the city came out in full force. They showed up with 40 people. I looked for the minutes, but the minutes for 2010 are not readily available on the site of the city of Dickinson. That would have been a regulated, supervised, staffed facility. This is an unregulated, unsupervised, unstaffed rental home in an R1 neighborhood. The concerns of the neighborhood are still the same as I stated in the previous meeting at the City Commission, September 3rd. We do feel that this facility is necessary in Dickinson. Addiction is a terrible disease or disability. The one question I have is, what disability can you use, or you claim a disability that you are an addict, then you use, and that disability is all of a sudden removed from you with a disability like autism or cerebral palsy? That's not the case. So I know there are federal laws. I have read a lot of them. It's just this is a very slippery slope. And there is neighborhood concern. I have had more conversations with my neighbors in the last month and a half to 2 months than I have ever had. And it's just, the neighborhood has definitely changed, and I would not wish this kind of change on anyone else's neighborhood in Dickinson for an unregulated, unstaffed, unsupervised rental home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Commissioners? Thank you. Anyone else in the public that would like to make a comment?
Thank you. I'm Russ Wolf. I live on 1131 Franklin Street. I want to ask all of you, would you want to move next door to a place like this? And I guarantee you, you wouldn't do it. So what does that do to our property value? We can't get what we want, because I guarantee you, none of you would want to move in there next door. I wouldn't want it. I wouldn't move in there, simply for the fact I want to live in a nice, peaceful neighborhood where I know my neighbors, who's there, what their names are, what they do. I have no idea what these people are doing to secure their livelihood, and I am all for rehab, but not in a residential neighborhood like ours. That's not the place to have something like that. That women's center out here is a perfect place to have a rehab center. There's no neighbors, it's a fenced property, it's an ideal spot. next door to a residential neighborhood is not the place to have this. And if you don't stop this, it's going to continue, and you're going to be fighting this forever. Because the justice system does not want to put people in jail anymore for any little infraction. They want to let them out and find their own way. It's got to stop. And we have to stop it. And I hope you take action and put an end to this nonsense. Because I know none of you would want this in your neighborhood. You wouldn't buy a place next to this neighborhood. I know I wouldn't. And Miss Wardner, like I say, has got 4 or 5 houses in her neighborhood that she could have put that in there, but she didn't want it because she didn't want her neighborhood ruined. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Any questions for Mr. Wolf before he steps away? Commissioners? Thank you, Mr. Wolf.
I just want to make a comment about these people. I'm a little upset, I guess. At our women's house, these people, when the water system failed, Rich and I took them into our homes. We had 5 ladies living in our homes that were some of these people. I guess what I'm shocked at with this whole thing is the stigma assigned to people that are in addiction and trying to recover. What I think is good about this is the city of Dickinson has become abundantly aware of what a sober living house does, but I think they've also become very aware of what the drug problem in this city is. That I can't tell you how many people have come to me and say, yeah, there's one 3 houses down from me, there's one down on our block. We have flop houses in this town that I just think are appalling. For those people that want to recover after they've had treatment, we offer a proven solution to a drastic problem. Frankly, I haven't heard very many solutions today except put it some other place. I don't think that is a solution to a very, very terrible problem in this town.
Thank you, Mrs. Wardner. Anyone else from the public that would like to make a comment? Please step forward.
Could I make one more comment?
Sure, Mr. Bice.
It will be short. You know, Dickinson has people with alcoholism and drug addicts all over town. None of you guys can deny that, no matter, and I would. These people in this house aren't using and are not drinking. Everybody's acting like they're sex offenders, they're violent criminals, they can't have their kids on the street. You know, the accusations that I'm hearing today are unfounded and totally non-factual. And I would hope you would take this in consideration when you're making your decisions, because there's a lot of fear out there that has no fact behind it whatsoever. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bice. Anyone else from the public? Seeing none, I don't know what the commissioners, I'd like to hear from Mr. Schwint and Mr. Sully regarding safety concerns, what a bedroom should consist of by code. If anybody has any objection to that?
Commissioners, Planning Zoning Board members. I've talked to Fire Marshal Selly about this. We have both sides here very passionate about it. When we look at this, we're looking at it as code compliance. The process wasn't followed what's on our books today. That's what we're looking at. If this would have come through that process, applying for that special use permit, a lot of these issues would have been addressed up front. we look at this as far as a definition without, obviously we look at the definition of a family as 4, because that's our municipal code. We look at this at the number, this would be a boarding house. I believe a boarding house isn't allowed in a R1 zoned neighborhood. So that's the way we'd look at it. If it were allowed in this neighborhood, it would be fully sprinkled. It goes to the commercial building code, not the residential building code, which this neighborhood is under.
Mr. Schwinn, if, like we had talked before, so many people per bedroom, if we went through the special use permit process and they had you come over to look at this house, what would you look for if they were going to have people sleeping in certain rooms?
The International Property Maintenance Code states that you need 50 square feet per individual. That's...
Okay, and then other safety items we would look at in...
Well, we'd be looking at the woman's sober living is fully sprinkled. It meets all of the building codes. We'd be looking at that same type of additions to this property.
Such as egress windows?
Egress windows would...
Smoke alarms?
Absolutely. If the building's fully sprinkled, the egress windows, we're looking at residential, we're looking at commercial. We'd be looking more at the commercial on a boarding house side of it than we would a single-family dwelling. So the code's changed, so there's more that's you have to comply with on the building commercial side. And the items that were addressed as far as a single-family house, you're mandated to have 2 off-street parking. With 10 individuals, and depending on how many people are there, it's generally that number goes up.
Thank you, Mr. Schwinn. Mr. Sully, any comments?
No, Leonard's correct. Everything he said is exactly what the fire code says. They mimic each other. We would look at this probably as classification of an R3 based on looking at it. I know we got a lot of different Rs going on. I'd have to go to either Leonard or Mr. Hadley as far as where that R3 could be as far as zoning. And from what I understand, it's not allowed in an R1. It'd have to be an R2 and R3, correct?
If it was boarding, yeah. I think from the standpoint of staff, Ms. Greip and I looked at it. I looked at it first, put it in the group care facility classification. I think we've agreed that it could fit into that classification. You know, how it fits into building and fire not necessarily always coincides with how zoning looks at it. And I don't know, Ms. Greip, I don't know if you want to chime in on that too, but I think we've agreed that that could be the designation that this would go in, and that's why we advertise it that way.
I believe the commission has the memo that I wrote regarding the sober living facility. I would agree with Mr. Hadley based on the purpose is to help continued sobriety, or so we looked at it as a nature of treatment, even though there's not a medical professional on site. But the purpose is to maintain sobriety, which is a form of, we viewed it as a form of treatment, which would allow it under the special use permit. As has been said, if it's a boarding facility, it's not allowed at all. And so I think in order to be compliant with the Fair Housing Act, we have to consider it as a group care facility so that it is a permitted use with a special use permit. My thought would be at this point that if the applicant wishes to continue through the special use permit process, that the building inspector and the fire marshal walk through the property, make a list of recommendations, bring it back, and then the board could actually consider it as a special use permit and review the specific reasonable accommodations that are being requested. I know there's been some conversation about the reasonable accommodations. Under the Fair Housing Act and all Federal Disabilities Act, reasonable accommodations are on a case-by-case basis. So we can't say, well, it's X people per square feet, it's X people per bedroom. Really have to look at the individual facility, the individual rules, and then work closely with the proprietor to determine what is a reasonable accommodation. Saying that they're going to put 5 people, and I know you're not saying this at all, so don't. But if they were saying we're going to have 5 people in a basement room with no egress windows, that would not be a reasonable accommodation for the city to make. However, if it's a matter of normally there were 4 people four unrelated people can live in a house. Well, we can make a reasonable accommodation to allow more people than that based on if they, and I believe Ms. Wardner has provided information that they've done some additional, I think, chain ladders and things to create additional fire safety. So if we have those types of conversations, that's what really needs to happen before the board could evaluate what reasonable accommodations can be made.
Thank you, Mr. Crabb.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just jump in.
Mr. Hadley?
Thank you, Ms. Cripe. On my memo, I did outline, I mean, we are challenged a little bit from a staff standpoint on this kind of an application because we're after the fact. We don't have a formal application. If you look through my memo, there's 10 items there that are items that there's a reason that we require those. When people come in the door and apply for applications, it's so we can actually take it to all of the people that we're involved with from the city standpoint or other agencies and have their review of it. So obviously this particular application or this particular facility opened prior to doing any of that. So, now we are struggling and saying, okay, building and fire, this is what we're now talking about, legal, planning, land use, neighbors, all of that. We're trying to piece this together after the fact, and I don't know that anyone, I haven't spoken to anyone that doesn't feel that this is a valid use. The only other thing I was going to say is a special use permit is an allowed use in that zone with conditions that are appropriate for that site. So, I don't know that it's a sentence that it's saying that a use wouldn't be allowed. It's saying that based on the proximity to neighbors, based on the proximity of, or the amount of parking on site, I think the applicants actually brought up parking, noise, all of those issues would be dealt with conditions, not necessarily strict conditions, but conditions of approval through a special use permit with public input and your input to then recommend to the city commission that this use in this location with 5 conditions seems acceptable and reasonable. And that, I think, just wanted to say that because I think we're kind of veering away from understanding that that's really what a special use permit is. It's an allowed use with specific conditions that are appropriate for that particular site. So I don't know if that helps or not, but.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any comments? Concerns? If not, I just have one comment. What struck me from Ms. Frankel's presentation was when they opened up in Bismarck, there was a misunderstanding. I think what we have here today is a misunderstanding. And what happens is by the applicants coming forward prior to opening this and applying for a special use permit would have started this conversation before they opened their doors. We would have had the neighborhood here to ask their questions. We would have had the applicant here to answer those questions. Instead, we had a facility that opened and there was a lot of misunderstandings, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anger because we got a facility that's open in a neighborhood that they didn't have a say before it happened. That is why we have these kind of ordinances and special use permits, to open that conversation. If you would apply for a special use permit, that neighborhood would have been notified. The neighbors would have had a chance to come to this meeting early on, express their concerns, try to work through it, and maybe we wouldn't be here today. That's my personal opinion on it. I don't know what the rest of the commission thinks, but now we've got something that is going to be very hard for me to look forward to when I have this many people in the neighborhood against it. Even after hearing their side, it's going to be hard for me to make that recommendation that we move this forward. If it happened up front, maybe we're not at this point. So that's all I have to say. If anybody else has anything?
I'd like to share a little bit too. This is a highly contentious issue, both sides. I mean, you can see the passion come out. And when I was thinking, I wish there was a way that this could have been handled differently and could have been done differently. Well, we actually have that. We have the special use permit process for this. I kind of heard something about the family unit and the definition. Is ours different than Bismarck's or Minot's, and should they have been able to go around that? I don't necessarily, in my opinion, I'm not discriminating on who lives there, but when you get to 10 people, 8, 10, 8 to 12, I think was the number, that concerns me. I don't care if it's 10 carpenters, 10 bricklayers, 10 college students. If they were moving 10 people into a house unrelated, I would have some concerns about that. And it doesn't even look like we are in the special use permit process. They haven't applied for one, so I'm going to have a tough time supporting this.
Anyone else? Any comments? Okay, we will end the public comments then. Commissioners, what are your wishes? Do we need to take action on this, Mr. Hadley?
Well, I'll defer to Ms. Bright, but, you know, we don't have a formal application. We've given an application numbers just so we can actually track this in the future. You know, without having a formal application, as you read in my memo, I don't know that I have a formal request as far as approval or denial. I would say, you know, I think in my memo I outlined if there's 10 items were brought in, we would surely put it on the next agenda and discuss it, whether it be at this site or another site. So I guess the direction, if the board agrees, the direction back to the applicant and then the community would be, if you had an application that was completed, you would surely review it and act upon it in the future, whether it be this site or another site. I don't know, Ms. Kripe, if you don't agree with that, please tell me. So.
Ms. Kripe,
Mr. Chair, at this point, based on the information from the applicant, there's only 2 people living in the home. Is that correct? So there's no, there's nothing to really regulate at this point. That's it's a conforming use for an R1. They can have up to 4 unrelated people without the commission having really any ability to regulate that. If they want to open the process back up, there was some talk about that special use permits are against the Fair Housing Act. I think I tried to explain that in my memo that in this particular case, the way the city's codes are written, it's not in violation of the Fair Housing Act because we would not allow 10 unrelated people to live in R1 at all. So if there was, someone brought a complaint forward saying there's 10 unrelated people living and then they're not classified as disabled, planning and zoning could force that to, that use to be discontinued. We do allow group homes, so the sober living facility would be allowable under a special use permit, but the special use permit, as Mr. Hadley said, goes through the building code, the fire code, and just make sure that we have that opportunity to make those reasonable accommodations as necessary. Part of that might be, part of the reasonable accommodations we might want to look at making are what's on that list of required items or working more closely with the applicant to accomplish those things if the applicant wishes to reopen the facility in that area. But at this time, I don't believe there's any action necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Pratt. Okay. I guess we'll close that portion. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. We will move on to item 4 on our agenda today. Work session items, it's Article 39.09, off-street parking proposed revisions, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, yes. Mr. Josephson is off ill today. This is one of his major projects he's working on now. We've talked about this in the past as far as softening our parking requirements. Obviously, we all know that we softened the parking requirements in the downtown district. We're looking at possibly re-looking at how we do that throughout town for a number of different uses. If you skim through, I mean, Stephen did a pretty good job of striking out what I would suggest on this, not only for the sake of time, but for the sake of that Stephen is much more up to speed on what is going on this than I am, because this is his project, that you maybe review it, and I'll have him go through it and answer any questions that you have at our next meeting. As you see, basically, it just is lessening the number of parking spaces required in some cases, allowing for some administrative, and then also Planning Commission review of parking requirements, to lessen those requirements is all, if someone wants to put in a big box store and they come in and prove that, our code right now requires 250 spaces, and they can show you and convince you that reasonably that 225 work, you have the ability to have a little more flexibility in some of the different uses that we may have. So that's, in a nutshell, that's basically what all of these standards are being tweaked to. And then, of course, our typical, we're changing city administrator or designee throughout code. Our entire code is written to where it gave one person the ability to be the person, the go-to person, let's say, for answers. And what we're doing consistently throughout the code in every section that we're re-looking at is saying the city administrator or designee, just to clear that up and clarify it that way. If next year the city administrator wants the fire marshal to be that designee person, that person can just take it and run with it rather than having it so strictly put in the code that it has to be either myself or Leonard or whoever involved with it. So I would suggest maybe just reading through this. If you have any, I know we had a pretty long discussion, and it was a number of months ago now on it. Maybe bring some of your thoughts, but also, travel around the community. Good places to go are the mall. We always hear downtown parking. We don't have any parking. Actually, if you spend any time downtown off and on during the week, whether it be, after 5, weekends, unless there's events going on, I would say we have a fair amount of parking. We do have a parking study that says we do have adequate parking. People aren't accustomed to, they'll go to the mall and park 350 feet away from the door and say there's lots of parking there. That's great, there is. But if you take a 350-foot distance from your front door in the downtown area, that puts you a block away. And people don't equate that to being close. And so, it's all perception. So I would just say keep an open mind and maybe look at some of the places that you patronize, that you drive by on a weekly basis, and just say, how does this work? Convenience stores, just places like that. Typically there's always a car or 2 or 3 at a convenience store. Do they need 15 spaces? Do they need, there's some of those things that we're just trying to look at and say, are they adequate? Because just the same for the city, we talked about shrinking the size of roadways in the city. There's a cost savings to the city, there's a cost savings to maintenance, whatnot. There's also a cost savings to the private individuals that are developing these. If they're not necessary, then do we really need to create a number of additional parking spaces when those come into town? So the mall is grossly overparked. If you go look at that, even when it's completely full, it was completely full, I would say that not all of those spaces have ever been occupied at the same time. Walmart is the same way, even on Black Friday. Been there, done that, and there's plenty of places to still park. So, and if someone chooses to do that, that's great. But as far as our regulations, we just want to look at it and maybe open it up a little bit. So if you have any questions on it, please either you can email me or you email Stephen directly or whatever, call him. But I would just say I'll have him go through that line by line next month when he is hopefully here and healthy.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Hadley. Why are we, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, why are we going on to people's private property telling them they can't put a camper on their property if it's off the street? And they have it, say they bought an extra lot, they extended their lot, so just so they could have the ability to say to park their camper or their boat. From what I read here, this allows that.
To not allow it, or you're saying, questioning why or why we wouldn't?
Right, from what I read, it says you can't have a boat, say I can't have a boat parked beside my garage on my property.
I think that.
Did I read it wrong?
I think that the way that it was proposed was that you could, but it had to be improved. You can't park it on grass or a soft surface. It had to be on a hard surface, I believe.
Okay. And then there was another thing, an unlicensed vehicle inside of a garage. How are you going to enforce that? How are you going to find out?
I think it's supposed to be outside a garage.
No, I'm pretty sure I read inside.
Yeah, inside a garage, I can tell you that I don't know if Leonard or anyone else is going to enforce that.
Well,
but
that's what I mean. So why are we
outside-
putting something in here that is unenforceable?
Well, I think it says 2 unlicensed now, and I believe that it's going to 1, and that the intent was for outside when it's visible. So obviously, if it's an interior stored garage vehicle that you're working on, I think that's obviously we're not going to be able to enforce that. So
Yeah, we're gonna have to look at that. Even if it's behind a fence and it's not visible from the street, why would it matter?
Right.
well, I just received a couple emails this week.
I mean, I guess if it's been like totaled out and just like sitting there, but if it's in somebody's backyard, I don't know, maybe Mr. Schwinn he's the code enforcement guy, maybe
Yeah,
he can get his.
he kind of gets the calls. I've received a number of them this last couple of weeks on people parking their vehicles in their backyard, which is somebody else's side yard and front yard, who weren't excited about it.
Commissioners, generally, the luck we've had is if somebody's obviously going to park an unoperable vehicle in the front yard and it's unlicensed, they're going to get a letter. We send that letter to PD. They tag it. Either they prove operability of that vehicle, or they put it inside of a garage or screened from a public street. That's generally that process. But if you're going to have a bunch of vehicles lined up that your neighbors are looking at constantly, you're going to get a letter. Those are the types of things that we want to clean up. But if it's screened from the public, whether it's licensed or inoperable, if it's screened or inside of a garage, we don't touch it.
And how many of those, Leonard, if you don't mind me saying, how many of those complaints do you get? Because I get some of them.
It's generally, we get those complaints in the summertime. I don't have a number on it. Though it is in my report as far as unlicensed vehicles or inoperable vehicles in the building report log. I don't have that number right offhand. But generally, it's a complaint based. It's the code also says you can't work on your vehicle in front of your garage for I think more than 10 days.
Mhm.
So you can't be doing a major remodel on a vehicle out in your driveway.
Overhauling your engine in the front yard.
Yeah.
Well, I think,
Take 10
Mr.
days.
Chairman.
Yes, Shirley.
The most complaints we get, say I list a property and then the buyers come through, possible buyers, and they look over and there's cars on the grass in the backyard. That's the only complaint we've received. If it's paved, it shouldn't be an issue.
Well, and throughout properties throughout the city, whether there's alleys, it's a different off-street in an alley, that's your rear yard. If it's on a hard dust-free surface, I mean, it's allowed. If you, in a newer neighborhood, you own the lot next to you, we generally, especially if it's in good repair, it's not sitting there in pieces, we allow people to park them on that lot. Our code reads that you could go out there and put some cement blocks and park it on there. I mean, we're really not gaining anything right there. So if it's in a neat fashion, we don't get those complaints.
Thank you, Mr. Schwinn.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else on that one?
Not for me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Does this come back as a formal ordinance in the future, I'm assuming?
Yeah, we'll discuss it next month with questions and go over anything else, and I'll clarify the garage and no garage. Obviously, we don't want anything to do with the garage, so if that's how it's portrayed in there, we'll definitely get rid of that, but we don't have any intent to do that, so.
The next item on our work session is a easement vacation for 2nd Avenue east of BJ Services. Mr. Kubis isn't here, so you gonna touch on that, Mr. Allen?
I believe I am, Mr. Chairman. I think in your packet, you've got a vacating memo from Mr. Kubus. Basically, it's pretty straightforward in that they're vacating 2nd Avenue East, just east of BJ Services. Street was never constructed during development. We do have utilities in there that Mr. Kubus would like an easement for, and then they would have to do a lot combination to combine those lots at that point. When this was vacated, obviously Mr. Kubus is in favor of this proposal, and once again, this is another example of this board being involved with kind of the, I'll call it the unraveling of things that we may have approved or done before, and we thought it was a good idea, and then how this site developed was a little differently than maybe what everybody expected, and at this point, there's really no use for us to keep some of these right-of-ways in some of these areas, but keep the right to have access to our utilities, obviously, that are there, and I think Mr. Kubus makes that pretty clear. In that, I would say that, obviously staff would support a recommendation to vacate it.
My question is 2nd Avenue East this blue east boundary, or is it the white boundary that runs through the middle of BJ's property?
2nd East is 3rd, 2nd. Yeah, I believe it goes right through the center.
That white line that goes through the center of their property?
Yeah.
That's it's not the blue boundary line onto the east?
No, the blue boundary line is the combination of those 4 lots that we're talking about that have to be combined. The box. No, it's first is.
There's only one parcel number on the big area, so that can't be more than one parcel.
1st Avenue.
Second Avenue East, right?
2nd Avenue East. Hold on one sec. East. Oh, yep. It's the 801, 801, 1005, and then last 3 are 800, last 3
So it-
700, last 3 600, and last 3 500.
Okay, so it is that east boundary of their current property.
So those to the alley would be combined into one lot, otherwise they wouldn't have, when we vacate that, they wouldn't have any frontage,
Yeah, that's what.
once that
okay.
roadway goes away.
That was my question. Okay.
So the other line, the other white line out to the east further, which is the alley line, is the line that we would follow, that, with those 4 combo lots. So those 4 lots ending in 0800 to 0500 would all be combined based on this.
Okay.
And then that, the green line represents the sewer line that we're talking about.
Yeah, they'll combine it to this big lot. Well, no, they'll combine this,
Yeah.
this into one big lot. So,
So they would have access off of,
yeah,
they'd have 2 accesses still from 34th and 29th.
it's just that, yeah, there would be, yeah, that's fine. Okay, any other questions on that? I don't know that that's an issue, as long as there's a combination there, so.
As long as we have an easement for those utilities that run up that, I think we're fine.
Okay. All right, commissioners, if not, we'll move on to item 5. Items not on the agenda, is there anything on here that you guys would like to discuss? It's not on the agenda? One more, but just hold that. Anyone?
I just have that letter or that email I sent all of you regarding, I had so many complaints because all of this attention is on Chinago now. People are driving by naturally wanting to know where it's at. So at 977, they have all these ornaments on this tree, Halloween ornaments with hanging babies. And that's been a real concern for a lot of people, and they're complaining about it. So I just want you to know that
Okay. You can go. we'll have you come up on the next one too,
Okay.
okay? The only thing I have is, this is probably for Mr. Hadley, the old Ivanhoe building. I see there's new antennas getting mounted to the side of the building. I don't ever recall a special use permit coming through for that.
Yeah, there's some confusion. Mr. Schwint and I have been discussing that. They came in and initially asked that they were just going to replace antennas on top of the existing facilities that are there, whatever facilities are there. I think Mr. Schwint's been up there. I haven't been up there, but what it corresponded to was them moving forward, and we didn't require a building permit at that point in time because they were going to be doing that, and they wound up installing side panels on the side of the building. So I was going to visit with Mr. Gaw today and probably Ms. Kripe and see if that typically would fall into. I would say I would agree that it would fall into getting a special use permit, and I had a long discussion with them long before I even started emailing back and forth with them about the tower that was back there, and that they were going to get rid of the cables and this and that, and they weren't really going to get rid of the tower, but I was good hopes of getting rid of the tower. So anyway, we are going to follow up on it, and yes, you'll probably see it as a request.
I just remember that we required a special use permit for, I don't remember who the carrier was, but up by the La Quinta when they added an additional cabinet, to the property. So for them to install new antennas on a building where we were hoping to probably get the antennas taken off
Yeah.
at some point because of the aesthetics.
The antennas on the top facility, and maybe Mr. Schwint can talk about that. There was a facility that was on top.
I remember. And
And
it
whatever
looks like
they,
they're still there.
if they're gonna install, if they had 10 antennas up there before and they were gonna install new antennas up on that same facility, I don't believe Mr. Schwint or I would have a problem, or that we would require them to go through that. I think what's happened is that they took that and ran with it, and unfortunately, I don't know when we started talking to them initially, but it's been a while ago, and they're just there now, so.
Commissioners, I think it's been close to a year since we've had emails with this carrier. And in those emails, generally maintenance to existing antennas, no permit is required. However, changes or additions to height or a different location would require a building permit, which in order to generate a building permit, I look at the planning and zoning for that approval that they're able to do that. It takes a special use permit to add these to the height of a structure or any type of communications. You need to come through this board in order to get that. They made a change to it, and I believe that process should have came from this board. I sent the email out and have not received a response from the carrier yet.
Okay.
I plan on following up with a phone call after this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Schwint. Any comments? All right, that's all I had. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to address?
Nope.
Okay, we'll move on to item 6 then, public issues and city concern not on the agenda.
Okay.
Come on up.
I guess our concern is what really happened today. It didn't get denied, it didn't get approved, it didn't get tabled. So we still have the same issues we had before we came in. Mrs. Wardner said she was selling the property or turning it into a rental, but how do we know that? I mean, that's one of our questions that we do have. So I guess what our question is what happens now? And how many times do we have to do this?
I can try to explain. As long as they keep less than 4 unrelated people there, there's nothing we can do.
Okay.
If they have more than the 4 people there, then it would fall back into the special use permit category. So why we took no action is currently there's only 2 people there. There's nothing for us really to do. They have not made a formal application to have more than 4. Until that happens, it's dead in the water pretty much. I mean, if they keep 2 or 4 people there, we can't do anything about it.
But
our ordinance allows 4 unrelated parties.
and I understand that.
So why do they keep getting the chance to apply for the permit again and again and again and again?
They can apply. Anybody can apply for a permit. That doesn't mean they're going to get it approved.
I don't believe they have applied yet.
And they've never applied.
No,
So
we
what-
know that.
How come that opportunity, that thing is open, knowing what they're going to do? So here we are all back here again for the same thing. Because I'm definitely going to come back.
I understand that. But unless there's more than 4 people there, there's nothing more that the city can do.
So we just wait for something bad to happen.
Well, it's not bad. I mean, anybody can buy a house and rent it out to 4 unrelated parties.
Yep.
We can't control that. If, for some reason, we find out there's more than the 4, then it would be taken up again by the planning director and our attorney, the city attorney, sending them, telling them they can't do that, and then asking them if they're not gonna apply for a permit, then we're gonna tell them they can't do it. So I mean, that's where we're at with it right now, so.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Yes.
help you out? And to rest assured, the for sale sign is going up today.
Thank you.
They are not comfortable being there, the tenants are not comfortable being there, and the Wardners do not like to have hostility. They don't want to be in a neighborhood they're not welcome.
Well, Mrs. Dukert, the hostility has come from both sides, not just our side. We came in trying to understand what happened to us. I know tempers and frustrations got to us today, but it was a long time of sitting and hearing things that has been contradicted. And thank you for the information of letting us know that the house is going to go on the market. That we greatly appreciate that. And I'm going to be looking forward to getting my quiet neighborhood back again, because
And
it
you
is a
can help me
nice
sell it,
neighborhood.
too.
Pardon me?
You can help me sell it too.
We will, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
nice
much.
day, you guys.
Have a good day.
All right. Anyone
Mr.
else?
Chairman, on that, just,
Oh,
and we don't,
have-
just to kind of pigtail off of that, we don't typically like to advertise applications that aren't applications, and we were hoping, from the standpoint of staff, that in that time frame, that they would come in and fill in those blanks, and then we could have a full meeting and a full hearing on it, based on that. But obviously, we advertised something that wasn't complete. So we really don't want to do that on a regular basis, but this particular thing, because of the public involvement, we felt it was probably valid, so that's why.
Agreed. Thank you, Mr. Hadley. All right, anything else? If not, I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned.